Okay, so today is Sunday, July the 12th, and we're in Asheville, North Carolina, in the home of Bob Strain. The interviewers are Random Kumba and Cal Goff, and the first couple of questions are going to be about just general background to contextual stuff before we get to the GSB part. So we'd like to know. Oh, and we're here with another center of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. This is my spiritual seeing eye dog, Bayou, a survivor of Hurricane Katrina and who knows what else.
Okay. If you would talk about your people and where they came from and how they met each other, and how it led up to you being born and wherever that was.
Okay. Well, I come from a big farming family community in West Texas, out in the West Texas scrublands, desert, the Chihuahua Desert, basically. I was raised on a farm and ranch. My father's father was from Arkansas and moved to West Texas with his dad when he was a little boy. My paternal grandmother was born and raised in the Cuthbert community in Mitchell County, and they married there. My mother's parents, I don't know that much about. My grandfather was an oil wildcatter, Charles Rathmel, and he traveled around. He was born in Abilene, Texas, and his wife was Velda Kinney, and she was from Oklahoma, but I don't know the town. My mother was born in Henrietta, Oklahoma, and my father was born in Colorado City, Texas, where I did most of my growing up. And they met in 1948. My dad had come back from World War II. My mother was working there for one of the oil landmen for Magnolia Oil, and they married, and I was born in 1950. We lived on the farm until I was in high school, and then we wound up moving into town. There had been a drought, and the economics pushed us out of farming, and my dad took a civilian job.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I am the oldest of 6 children. I have 4 younger brothers and 1 younger sister.
Are they all still living?
They are all living. My parents are deceased, and my grandparents, of course. But yeah, we're still in close touch. We talk weekly. They're all in the general vicinity where I grew up. One brother lives in South Texas in Corpus Christi, and the others live in Big Spring, which is the next city over from Colorado City. And I'm the only one that's out of state at this point.
So when were you born?
I was born January 12th, 1950.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a Capricorn. I was born in the local hospital in Colorado City, Root Valley Hospital. And there's, it was a very small community, and our family, we had lots of cousins and aunts and uncles and second cousins and third whatevers, and they were all farmers and ranchers, and so it was sort of I was sort of raised by a village.
Was there anybody in your family that you consider a mentor or a savior of any sort if you needed to be saved from anything?
Well, my grandfather on my father's side, I was his first grandchild, and he just took to me like crazy. My grandmother latched onto my second brother, the young one next to me, but I was my granddad's apple of his eye. And there are some old photos that I have of me. He would bounce me around in his pickup truck. We'd go look at the cattle or do this or that, and I just went everywhere with him. And he was a very kind man. He died when I was 8, and
Oh.
and he was the main.
But you remember him?
Oh, very definitely.
Oh, wow.
He made a big mark. He was a great influence on my life. I didn't have a lot of other role models. My dad was more distant. He had his own problems in life, and I think he was perplexed by this little sissy boy that he produced and didn't really know what to do with me much. And I mean, he loved me, but he was just, in some ways, he was not very available to me. And but my grandfather was. I would spend the night with him, and we would make like a little tent under the bed, and we would tell stories and laugh and giggle, and he would tell me rhymes and bedtime stories, and it was just losing him was a hard one. It was very hard. He died 3 days before Christmas, and he had already bought my present. I had told him at that point I wanted to be a writer when I grew up, so he bought me a portable typewriter for my Christmas gift that year. And
You had a typewriter when you were 8 years old? Wow.
I didn't know what to do with it. I'd punch keys, but I didn't know how to type yet.
Wow.
But he was a forward-looking man. He wanted his children and grandchildren to do well. He was very frugal. He and my grandmother were very frugal, so that they could invest for their heirs, and I benefited from that ultimately. But I still miss him. That was a long time ago.
Can you tell us some experiences that you had as a kid that are still operating in your personality or in your memory today that you connect who you are today with that person?
Well, I've always been about the piano. I started lessons when I was 8, and before that even I had tried. I wanted to play when I was just from as early as I can remember.
Was there a piano in the house?
There was. My younger brother set fire to it and burned it up at some point playing with matches. But when I was 5, I started lessons, and my hands couldn't even reach an octave then. I was just little, and I took about 3 lessons, and the teacher was teaching. My mom also said, bring him back in 2 or 3 years. He's going to do fine, but he's just not ready yet. And I'm sure I was driving her crazy with ADD or something, trying to do everything but what I was supposed to do. So I came back when I was 8 and studied for a number of years. But that's been my path. I knew it from early on. I wanted to play the piano, and I wanted to make music and be in that world, and that's what I've done.
Are any of your other family people musical?
All of the children in my family were. My father loved country music, and he played the guitar, and my mother played piano well enough to sing her hymns and accompany herself. But I play piano and a couple of other instruments, and my second brother plays guitar and trombone, and then the next 2 are twins. One of them plays trumpet, and one plays what does Jim play? He got my saxophone, so he plays saxophone, and then Steve plays piano and trombone and drums and bass, and I don't know. He's one of the talented.
You learned the saxophone too? Oh, anything else?
Flute,
really?
clarinet,
Okay.
woodwinds. Most of the woodwinds I can play. Not very well, but I can do it. And a little bit of guitar.
And was that all private lessons, or did y'all have a school that had a band?
It was private lessons. I don't know how my parents afforded it. They had all these kids in band and going to camp and buying uniforms and sheet music and taking lessons, and they managed to get us, keep us occupied that way.
Okay.
Their thinking, I think, at that time it was probably a lot cheaper than bail money.
Okay. All right. So your family stayed in Texas,
Mhm.
and you stayed there until.
I left home when I was 18 to go to college in
Okay.
Dallas.
In Dallas.
So I was still in Texas, but I was away from home. And that didn't go too well. And I retreated and then joined the Navy. And I wound up in the Navy, stationed ultimately in the East Coast in the Norfolk area. And when I got out of the Navy, I went to D.C. to look for work. And that's where I met my partner, and that part of my life
Okay.
began.
So back up a little bit. I assume
Okay,
to your coming out, your other experience. How did that? Did you
Somebody
come
once
out,
said,
or were
somebody
you?
asked Quentin Chris once, when did you come out? And he said, when did I come out? I was never in.
Uh-huh.
My first sexual experiences with boys were I had a bit of a crush and was playmates with our pastor's son, who was my age, and we began experimenting when I was about 12.
Uh-huh.
I'd had crushes on boys from the time I could remember, from the time I was 3 or 4. I just thought boys were the deal. I liked their energy. I liked the way they were. I didn't have a name for it or any specific connection to it. But when I was about 12 and I was beginning to hit puberty, my preacher's son and I were buddies, and we'd sleep over, and and it led to exploration. He decided it was exploration, and I decided it was a life path.
Yeah.
But that was the first experience, and it just made sense to me. It like filled in a blank that I'd always known. There was something about me that I didn't understand, and that sort of turned on the lights for me, and I knew that was it. And then the next thing was, well, okay, what do you do with this? You're in a small community in West Texas. I had no idea if there was anybody else like me, but I began kind of reading, and I began to discover that there was a gay world out there that I just was away from. So my exit strategy was go to college and get into a city and find your people. And it took a while. I was not sexually active in college. I think I had a couple of opportunities, but I was so fear-besotted that I didn't follow through. And when I was in the Navy, I did have a full-out sexual experience with a fellow musician in the Navy program. And
did you get to use your music in the Navy? Yeah.
Yeah, I was in the Navy School of Music, and that was my assignment, duty station.
So the Navy lasted how many years? 2? 4?
About 10 months.
10 months. Okay.
I had developed a bit of a problem with, a bit more than a bit of a problem with alcohol in college. My family were very religious, so part of my rebellion was I was going to drink and smoke and play cards and dance and all that stuff. And I did, and that caused me to be sent home from college within the first year. And I'd gone on a full scholarship, so nobody could figure out what had happened to me. And the Navy was a similar situation. Ultimately I was put out over a very drunken, messy escapade that I don't remember very much of. I got out with honorable discharge. I forget the exact terminology, but it was basically, this is a medical-based discharge, and we'll take you back after we've taken all the 90-year-old women and 4-year-olds to fight. So
then you went to D.C. from there?
I did. I did. Well, I mean,
Did you ever live in Norfolk or the Tidewater area? You did.
Well, while I was in the Navy, I was at Little Creek at the Naval Amphibious Base. That's where the School of Music was.
Okay.
And so I knew there was no real future for me in Texas. Farming is very expensive to get into, even if I, had an inclination. But culturally, there was nothing for me there, or socially. And So I had an aunt and uncle in D.C., and they were willing to put me up and help me find work. And I stayed with them for, I think it was a total of about 9 months. And I found work. I worked for a while. I was in a rock band for a while, living in a group house off and on. It was very sporadic. This was 1970, 71, and the hippie movement was in full flower, and I was just going to be part of that and be a rocker. And so, I did a lot of drugs, and I lived in this house with these other musicians for a bit, and then that broke up. The band broke up, and I went back up at the aunt and uncle's until I could get a job. And I started with a music company downtown, one of these old department store style music companies, 7 floors of everything, and old company. And my partner worked there, Dexter worked there. That's where we met. And so that was sort of how I got to D.C. And I stayed there. We were there for 20 years together, and then moved to West Virginia. And I was there for 20 years. The first 8 he was with me, and then when he passed, I was there for a while alone. And now I'm here as of 2.5 years ago.
Okay. So your relationship history started with him?
He was it.
Okay. All right.
I've had a couple of drive-by shootings, but
Oh yeah.
but that's all.
Okay. And before we get to the GSV part, what's the backdrop, the religious or the spiritual backdrop that preceded that, if there was one?
Oh yeah. Well,
Okay. So they were religious. Your mom was religious.
yeah, I was baptized into the Methodist Church when I was like 10. That was my dad's family and all. It was, like I said, big community farm family. They all were Methodists, and but when I was about the time that I was baptized there, my mother converted to the Pentecostal church, to one of the farther out branches of Pentecostalism, and sort of dragged her kids along. So I've got double fire insurance because I've been baptized in 2 different traditions now. The Methodists, what I remember of that was that I learned some really lovely old hymns, and that I had an exceptionally mean Sunday school teacher who kept sending me out of the room. And not much else. I remember I wanted to play the organ in the church. They had a nice big Hammond organ, and I wanted to play organ. I wanted to learn it. But that's about it for the Methodist experience. The Pentecostal experience was something else again, because I could play the piano, I got promoted right away. So at like 12 years old, I was the church piano player, playing for all the services, all the revivals, all the tent meetings. And I wound up with an accordion for when we didn't have a piano available, and we would go to jail services and whatnot, and I was the little fairy playing the music. I rebelled hard against that. It never felt. It was not welcoming to me. I didn't reveal why it wasn't, but it just wasn't. But I knew that there was no place for me there. And it took a long time to reconcile that after I was away from there. But ultimately, I came to see that much of what I learned there was useful to me in life. I learned a lot about living a moral life, and some of the better parts of Christian teachings about kindness and loving your neighbor and those sort of things, which I try to practice in my life. My real spiritual journey began in 1979 when I finally decided that I couldn't drink and use drugs anymore, and I started going to a recovery program, which I won't name here because they prefer to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, and film.
Mm-hmm.
But and that, you know, that path is very emphatic that you need to develop a relationship with a higher power, but that you get to figure out what that means for you. And as I heard someone say once about that subject, if I get to choose my own higher power, I'm going to pick a nice one. And that was sort of a aha moment for me of like, let's get rid of the vengeful, judging, punishing, angry Old Testament God that I had been in such fear of, because I really had bought into it, and it was like, well, you know, I know what Leviticus says about people like me, and I'm just going to have to, I better have fun while I'm here, because afterwards it's not going to be so great.
Yeah.
So, you know, recovery allowed me to step out of that fear and into something much, much better.
This was in D.C. or about?
It started in D.C. I was 29 when I went to my first recovery meeting, and I'm still at it, you know. So,
anything that you want to talk about between 79 and whenever you stumbled into GSV?
Well, I think it was a gradual awakening. You know, certainly at the beginning of recovery, I was full of pushback. I didn't want to hear it, blah, blah, blah. And so it was sort of a wearing away the stone over time that I began to open myself up to the possibility of spiritual concepts. And then there was a period of kind of exploration where, you know, 1 month I was a Buddhist, and 1 month I was a Hindu, and 1 month I was, I don't know what, Wiccan, and, you know, just flavor of the month kind of thing. And I learned from pretty much all of those experiences.
So you were in your relationship when you went into recovery?
Yep.
Was he involved in that too?
No. Dex was the son of an alcoholic, and one of the things that drove me into recovery was he finally said, I cannot do this anymore. If you don't get help, you're going to have to leave. And that horrified me, that idea. I really loved him, and I wanted that to be my life. And the idea of just not having him there was intolerable. Of course, you know, you can't really do that for anybody else, but that was a big part of getting me motivated to look at myself. And he stuck by me through, I mean, early recovery makes late alcoholism look pretty tame in some ways, because you change so radically, so quickly, and if you're in a relationship, they just don't know who is this person, what's happened to Bob. But he stuck it out, and things got better with time.
How did you hear about GSV? Remember?
Yeah, it was kind of mysterious, like much of GSV. I had been to a Body Electric event in California at Wildwood, a week-long thing in the summer of 1991. And I met Rocco Pat there, and Elliot Mackel and Jeff Glauser. So there were several people that were involved in GSV to some degree at the very beginning. And one of them, I don't know who, sent me an invitation. It just, I don't know who did it. It just suddenly there was this thing about this 91 conference. And normally I would have just brushed it off, but James Broughton was going to be the keynote speaker. And I had been a fan of his since I was in my 20s.
How had you heard of him?
I was writing poetry, and I was doing trade-offs with a lesbian friend at work that was a poet, and we would trade work and critique it and all. And she just one day she handed me, he'd been interviewed in some poetry magazine rather. And she said, "I think you'd be interested in what my friend James has to say about poetry." And I read the interview, and I was just enchanted with him. You know, he was just such a force of nature. And at the very end of the interview, they quoted one of his poems, which became kind of a key thing for me. It's a little poem called "It Is the Song." It's very short. It's only about 6 or 8 lines.
What does it say?
Well, if I can quote, I think I can quote it. So, listen. Do you ever hear it? Do you know what your voice is always singing? Listen. It sings like everything, as if no song like this were ever sung before. It is the song you have been singing all your life.
Wow.
And something about that just shot me in the heart. It was like, this man speaks the language I've always wanted to hear. So I knew he was older and that he was on the West Coast, so I figured that would probably be my chance to hear him, was if I got to that conference. And that's what brought me.
So he was at the GSV conference that you were invited to?
Yeah, he was the
Okay.
keynote speaker
All right.
for the second year.
Okay. So you were living then where?
That time I was still in D.C. That was our last year there.
Okay. And what else was going on in your life at that time?
Well, there was this thing called the AIDS crisis. I had been diagnosed. My best friend is on the list you gave, Ricky Flippin. And we had become sort of, he was in recovery with me, and we had become sort of spiritual adventurers together. We went to all kinds of stuff. We'd go to a retreat here, or we went to a spiritualist church for a channeling, or we'd go to a Course in Miracles thing. And we did all this stuff together, and then we'd go home and chatter and process, and I kind of lost my track there.
I just was wondering what was going on in your life before.
Well, okay, so AIDS was going on. It was affecting me directly. It was affecting him very heavily. He was very sick, or becoming very sick. And that was a lot of it. I had been exploring Body Electric for a little while. I mentioned that I was out in California at a retreat.
So you expected to know some people who were going to be at the retreat, the first conference?
Well, I did, and Ricky went with me.
Okay.
He decided it was something he'd do too, and we took off. And here we are.
Did y'all travel in a car?
We traveled in a car down through Virginia. We got lost and wound up spending the night in Lynchburg, Virginia.
Okay.
Ricky was African American,
And
he was from the north, from the city. He was terrified.
yeah.
Lynchburg,
Right.
the home of Jerry Falwell and all. And we got lost coming across the mountains here between Johnson City and here. And back then there was no 26. It was little switchback roads, and you could kind of hear the banjos playing off in the distance. And so we were barely speaking by the time we got to GSV, but we got there.
And you remember what it was like driving up to it? I mean, were you apprehensive, or were you excited, or both, or?
A little of both. I think
Did you think it was going to be another Body Electric-y kind of thing, or?
No, I didn't know what it was going to be. It just, I still have the program. It's in the box there with the invitation. It just didn't explain very much. And so we didn't know. When we were, like I said, we were barely speaking. It had been a hard ride down, and just our nerves were frayed. And it was one of those foggy days on the mountain, and we're driving up into this, we didn't know what. And we got to the parking lot, and there was not a soul around. And we were just like, what is this? And we went in the office, and they said, well, here's your cabin, and go on down there, and dinner, they'll ring a bell when it's dinner time. And we went, and we were both just like, I don't know what we're doing here exactly. And
but officially, it was just another one of these spiritual adventure thingies you were trying out. Okay.
Well, and
to
hear James Brown.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were just doing that, and they rang the dinner bell, and I heard crunching. They had gravel walks then where the ring circle is now, and I heard crunching out there, and I looked out the window, and there was a man who used to come to the conference. You would know him, Raphael Sabatini. And Raphael was a large gentleman who did extraordinary drag. And he was crunching up the walk. He was wearing polka dot dress and pearls, and he had a hat with a price tag on it, and high heels in the gravel.
Crunch.
And right behind him was a Shakespearean actor from Norfolk named Byron. Byron was about 6'5", and he had shoulder-length flowing hair, and he had a long flowing caftan, and he's walking up the walk like this with this pose behind. There's just this like this little tableau going up the hill. And I looked at Ricky and I said, "We're going to be fine." And so it was.
Okay. So, let's see. What do you remember, if you can remember your first conference versus the other one? Good luck with that. I couldn't, but maybe you can remember the first conference.
Well, it was
at least the Broughton things.
Yeah, well, as I said before, it was before the Great Vowel Shift, so it's a little fuzzy. But I do remember some things. Like I said, Ricky and I were having difficulties that weekend, so.
But you were in the same cabin?
We were in the same cabin. It was cabin 9. And at that time, I don't know what it is now, but there was a front bedroom and a back bedroom, and you had to go to the back bedroom to get to the bathroom. And so we were in there, and Ron Gillette was in the front room, and we had bunks in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember hanging out with Ron and fretting and probably sniveling a little bit about, "Oh, I brought him all this way, and that ungrateful bastard is just like mean." I met Crazy Bear, Barry Bonifay, and I met John Stowe, King Thaxton. I remember a lot of these people. I remember Raven Wolfdancer scared the shit out of me. He was very intimidating personally. He had that sort of energy, fierce dark energy going on. And I was a little bit of a milquetoast, so I stayed away from him. I remember there was a session in the amphitheater, and that's where I met Franklin Abbott. He was wearing that hat of his, that fedora with the horns on it. And Charlie Murphy was there. He was a musician from, I think, Seattle area that played some music and guitar and sang. John Stowe did one of his amazing workshops on flower essences. And I met some people that became long-term friends. I didn't know it at the time, but I knew that there was something about them that it just felt like these were my people, that that they had similar interests and that they were engaging. And
what was there a small group deal there?
There was, and I was trying to think what our group was called. I think we were the Gay Lilies. Mm-hmm. There was one that was called the Fucking Fawns. I remember them, and then the Gay Lilies. We were the Gay Lilies. Mm-hmm. I don't remember who led it or anything much about it. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I really remember, James did a film festival of his films one night, and he and Joel Singer, his lover, had made a lot of films, and they had a film fest, and he read some of his longer poems that some of the films were based on. So that was moving. And I remember at the very end of the conference, I had talked to him about why I was there and that poem.
Oh, really?
And at the very end of the conference, he said, before I close, I want to read a poem for someone who traveled a long way to hear it.
Wow.
And he read my poem to close his speech.
Wow.
It was very moving, and we corresponded for a while after that until his stroke.
Mm-hmm. Did you do any music there? conference? Did you?
Oh yes,
Oh,
I
you
told this
did.
in my salon a few years ago. Be careful what you say yes to at GSB. At that time, everything was in the great room of the lodge. There wasn't a tree house then.
Uh-huh.
And Raphael ruled the talent show,
Mm-hmm.
and he'd run around with his little notebook collecting people all weekend. Back then, we started on like Friday evening and we were done by Sunday noon, so it was a very short conference. But Saturday night was the talent show, and he had found out that I played piano, and he said, "Dawn, would you do a little music for the show? And I've got somebody here that you could accompany." And I forget who exactly that was, but so I played something for somebody, and I played some solo thing. And I thought afterwards, my normal default setting for any new situation like that would have been no. But something said, do this. And that sort of opened up a whole path in my life that I wasn't expecting. I was a journalist when I went to my first conference. That was my work in D.C.
Okay.
I had worked for a news company for a number of years and had worked myself into a pretty good position there, which was I enjoyed the work, but it wasn't my heart.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I enjoyed it because I was good at it.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened with all that over time, this may anticipate some of your questions, I don't know.
That's okay.
But Raphael got me playing, and I went home and I thought, you've dabbled around with piano all your life, you've had some lessons, but you've never really taken it very seriously. You've never worked at it the way that you need to work at it to become really good.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you see what you can do with it? And as it happened, the following year I left work on disability. I was starting to get really pretty sick. And we moved to West Virginia, and I was, I'd sort of thought, well, I'm going out to West Virginia to die. Oh, God. And but then, things changed and meds started to come along, and I was sitting there with nothing to do. So I started back to school, and I took music courses at a teacher's college near there. And at the age of 47, in 1997, I got my bachelor's degree in music. And then I went on to graduate work, and I did a Master of Music, and I did a Doctor of Musical Arts, and wound up teaching at Shenandoah University in Virginia for about 10 years, teaching piano and theory. And that all came out of saying yes to Raphael and the challenge that put to me about, why don't you see what you can do with this? Why don't you see what's in this for you? What's there? So I caution people, be real careful what you say yes to at GSB, because it could take you on a journey.
Do you remember how you felt at the end of the conference?
I couldn't stop crying. I felt like I found my family, and now I'm going back away from them.
Mm-hmm.
And we were sitting, I was sitting on the floor on the carpet. There were like 90 some people there, I think. So it was pretty crowded. And Ron Lamb and I had hit off a friendship, and I just remember I leaned back into his lap and just sobbed and sobbed, because I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay there and just be there. I was startled at the emotion that came up for me. It was like, I've looked for you guys for 40 years, and now I found you, and you're all going back to Atlanta, and I'm going to West Virginia. What is that about?
Yeah.
But that was mainly what I remember. Is I just thought, I don't think I've ever cried as much.
Oh, wow. So how was the drive home? Do you remember that part?
Well, yeah. By then, Ricky and I we were sort of ecstatic from everything. So we were doing okay, and we just processed a lot. We drove and talked.
Do you remember if you were glad that you had a passenger to go home?
I was.
Yeah. Okay.
It felt like there was just so much that I wanted to say, and I needed somebody to say it to, and he was doing the same thing. There was an interesting group that year. There were some Native American guys. They did a pipe ceremony, and it was just there were a lot of Body Electric people from the summer sessions. That's where I met John Ballou and some of those guys. So we just had lots to talk about, because we kind of diverged there. I went and did this and he went and did that, so we were kind of filling each other in on everything we'd missed.
I think that's one of the most fun parts.
Yeah.
Debriefing.
Yeah, he was telling me about Crazy Bear's medicine wheel workshop, and I was telling him about whatever one I'd been at.
Okay, so I guess you had made a decision by then that if there were other conferences you would probably come or try to come, or
Oh yeah.
okay.
Couldn't wait.
All right.
Well, I was going to say the following year, Ricky and I were going to come back again, and he wound up in the hospital a week before, and he was beginning his active dying process, and I was going to cancel because I'd become pretty much his support system, and he insisted. He said no. He said, I'm taken care of here for now, and you're going to need what you can get at GSV for what's ahead of us. And that was just a couple of months before he died.
So you were able to tell him about that conference when you
Oh
went
yeah,
by it?
oh yeah. He wanted to hear everything about it, and who was there and who wasn't, and what had happened, and did I get laid? No.
So did you come to the second conference by yourself?
I did.
In the car again, all
Yep.
the way?
Yep.
How many hours did it take?
525 miles.
Oh, wow.
It's about a 9.5, 10-hour drive from where I was there to Highlands, to the mountain.
Wow.
So I would drive down here, stop, and go on up.
Oh, to Asheville.
I'd drive to Asheville the day before, and then the next morning head on up there. I was one of those crashers that always showed up at like 11 in the morning up there when you couldn't check in until 3.
Ready to go.
Yeah.
Okay. So is there any way you can talk about what you expected the conference to be and how it was different, or did you, is that not an important question?
Well, I thought about that. I'd seen that. I don't know what I expected, other than I wanted to meet James Broughton.
Okay.
But the rest of it, I thought it was going to be sort of like business conferences that I'd been to or something, that there'd be, death by PowerPoint kind of
Yes.
thing.
Right.
And
It was sort of different. Huh?
it was very different. So I accomplished what I was looking. I mean, I did expect to meet James Broughton. I was overwhelmed by how accessible he was, and how he was not ivory tower. He was very engaged the whole weekend, and that I could have a conversation with a keynoter like that. Beyond that, I didn't know. Until I got there. I didn't know that there was going to be a single soul there that I knew other than Ricky. I didn't know who had sent me the invitation, where it had come from, and I didn't realize that it was the Body Electric connection until I was there.
Because you had been to other things, were some of the ritual things or the workshops alienating to you, or they were more of the same, or they were not scary?
I'd never experienced much of that. Heart Circle is very similar to what happens in a recovery group meeting. You go around the room one by one and you share what's in your heart. So I was familiar with that part of it. The ritual aspects, like the greeting, the directions and all, I'd been to a few things. I was kind of new agey in DC area, so I've been to a few things, and I knew a little bit about that. So none of that seemed that strange. It was the way it was organized. I didn't. I think I was expecting sort of like there'll be a test or something along the way, or these workshops you're going to have to, fill out a questionnaire or something. So it was a lot freer than I was expecting. In that way, that there was structure, but it wasn't oppressive structure. It was just just enough to create a container, really, and then all sorts of things could happen.
So, do you remember once you got back from the conference, did it seem like a long time before you could see these people again?
It did.
Or were there people living up there that kind of resonated with this kind of stuff, or was this?
No,
there
I
was
was
nothing like that up there.
No,
for you?
not really. There was Ricky,
Okay.
my friend, and we sort of became a support system of two about the whole thing.
Mhm.
You know, we both, it was profound for us both, and we knew that. So we, you know, it was a stormy year ahead for him
Mhm.
and for both of us, and that became a source of comfort to us,
Wonderful.
that memory.
Do you remember what, or not do you remember, but what are some of your favorite things that happen at conferences?
My favorite things. Well, it varies from year to year.
Mm-hmm.
Every conference that I've been to has had its own very, very distinct flavor. Some years I'm all about the keynote speaker and I'm just moved and blown away. And some years I kind of doze through that and I'm, you know, it's the small group is vibrant, or it's a workshop that I particularly like.
Mhm.
Part of it too, and this isn't really part of the conference per se, but just being in that sacred space on that mountain. There's something that just works my soul with that. And there are times that I go to the conference and I don't attend much of anything.
Mhm.
I sit on the benches and listen to the birds and watch the clouds and the sun and just feel the energy of the place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've gone to all but the first conference now, and after a while you've done the breath work and you've walked the labyrinth and it becomes repetitious on some levels. But what draws me back is the connections I've made with the mountain itself, the land, the place,
Mm-hmm.
and the men that go to GSV.
Mm-hmm.
I have wonderful friends that's the reason I go. I want to sit and I want to have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you and I want to hear what your life is about and what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I led a small group. Well, I've done it a number of times, but usually my opening question to get it going is, tell us your passion.
Mm-hmm.
And what comes out of people's mouths sometimes just, it's illuminating. People aren't asked that question very often.
Mm-hmm.
So they tend to tell the truth. And sometimes it's, so, you know, that's a rambling answer, but there's so many reasons to go up there, and it always shifts. It's never going to be the same,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
You know, when we start repeating ourselves, we're doomed.
Something that has not gotten talked about so far in the interviews has been a description of the mountain itself. Could you talk about what that
I would
place is
love
like?
to. I would love to.
Okay.
They used to do an environmental orientation there, and they've dropped it. And I wish they'd bring it back because it sets such a feeling of where we are and how special it is. That was sacred Cherokee land. That was part of the Cherokee area before they were forced onto the reservation and out to the Trail of Tears.
Mm-hmm.
And before them, there were people there. This some of the oldest mountains in the world. And what they used to talk about there in the orientation, which was profound for me, was that during the last ice age, the glaciers did not reach those mountains. They stopped just north of here and retreated.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened was that birds carried seeds from the trees on those mountains that ultimately reforested all of the eastern U.S. and Canada. It all comes from that area around Highlands.
Wow.
And there are, I forget how many 1,000 species of things they've identified there. It's a temperate rainforest, which Asheville is also. It's part of the same area. There are orchids that only grow here and in China. The white oaks that we see, those gnarly old twisted little trees up there, are between 300 and 500 years old. They're really ancient beings. And it's a scaly bald, and it's the weather up there at that altitude. We're about, I think, close to 5,000 feet on the top of the mountain there, maybe a little more, I'm not sure. But the weather tends to be kind of extreme. It's temperate, but when a storm blows in, you know that you've got a storm on your hands. And
have you ever been there in the snow?
I've not been there in the snow. I've been there in a hurricane, and I've been there in an amazing storm in November that didn't bring snow, but it was like what we in Texas would have called a blue norther. That was really pretty astounding. And then a couple of times in thunderstorms where the lightning was striking all over the place because we're at the top of the world.
Yeah. Okay. Are there favorite places that you like to go and hang out in there or not?
Well, I like to go to Memorial Garden to say hello to friends.
And what is that?
The Memorial Garden? It's about halfway down the driveway, or a little ways down the driveway. It's not halfway, but it overlooks a valley. There's a seating area there with a railing where you look out into the valley, and there are tiles of names of people who have passed, including some GSV folks. I was there. King Thaxton's ashes were released from there. I think John Stowe's, some of his were released there. And I go to just kind of commune with them. There's a hiking trail just if you go down the hill past Cabin 1 and into the woods down there. There's a nice trail down there with lots of fallen logs and stuff to just sit and be. You could be anywhere on the planet. There's just nothing around you. Meditation Rock. I like to do mornings out there if I wake up early enough and see the sunrise.
Have you always stayed in cabins, or have you stayed in the lodge sometimes?
I've done a little bit of everything. I've been in the cabins, I've been in the bunkhouses, I've been in the lodge. I've been in Emerson, which is sort of the kind of the condo of the lot. It has a kitchen.
Yeah.
And I've been in Ascender, which is one of the funkiest things on the planet. It's just mold riddled and little warrens and rooms. And I've slept on the couch a few times because my cabin mate was engaged in some way and I needed to be elsewhere.
I see. I thought you were going to say snoring, but I guess you meant something.
Well, I've moved on account of snoring once, but but no, they would be entertaining and I'd need to get lost, so I'd sleep on the treehouse sofa or something, or in the library.
So, if you would describe the tower thing that's there too. There's a tower.
Yeah, the watchtower or
Yeah.
fire tower.
So that'd be nice to hear about what it looks like and what happens up there and just what it is.
Well, it's I think it was originally maybe a fire tower. It's or a watchtower, but let's see. There are 1, 2, 3. It's 4 stories high, I believe. And each story there's a little meeting room that you can go into with plenty of windows to look out. And on the top is a deck with a railing. We typically usually Chaser will hang Tibetan chimes and flags and all sorts of things up there to carry on and make noise and wave in the breeze. But when you're up on top, which of course I get a little out of breath. That's 4 flights. But once I recovered, you can see in every direction. You're looking just at the Blue Ridge and all the mountains around. It's like looking at the ocean in a way. They look like waves on the ocean.
Yeah.
And very often you're up high enough, you'll see hawks and things circling. And
do you have any memories of things that of festoonery of various kinds on the mountain when you got there, or before you left?
Well, there used to be a banner that I think King, or maybe Randy Taylor, designed it and King executed it. I don't know how that worked. But it hung across the driveway, and coming up the mountain it said, "Welcome Gay Spirit Visions," and going down it said, "Go with Gay Spirit."
Mm-hmm.
And it was lavender, of course, and it had the little marching figures that we used to have on the Visionary across it. I remember Cassandra used to decorate the woods with his blow-up dolls and hearts and things, and he'd have them hanging in all these trees. And it was such an unlikely offering from such a grumpy soul. And they did cabin decorating contest one year, but I'm impaired in that area, so I just let them have it.
Okay. Well, how about some of the other keynote people that you remember encountering?
Well, Andrew Raymer has been a staple there for a long time, and I always have loved what he has to say, how he takes us into prehistory,
Mm-hmm.
his cosmology, really. And I think that's important that we have, and people will quibble, oh, that's made up stuff and all, but that isn't all cosmology ultimately made up stuff that somebody thought up or had a vision of, or the angel Mormoni spoke to.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that he does that, and he's fearless about it, that he shares his vision of that, and that it gives us a sense of tribalism that goes back beyond time.
Mm-hmm.
I really loved Don Clark when he was there. His energy was extraordinary, sweet. He's the author of Loving Someone Gay, a psychologist from San Francisco, and he was keynote, I want to say, about 1998 or 99 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a ways back. But his message was tell the truth. And it was not just tell the truth about being gay, but if you have desire for someone here, tell the truth. Don't play games. Don't beat about the bush. And if they tell you their truth is no, then accept their truth as being.
Mm-hmm.
But and he had us to engage in some things that would help us bring that into reality for us. A couple more. Christian de la Huerta led an amazing meditation at the end of his keynote. He really took us on a journey somewhere, and I'm not sure I ever came back. And oh goodness,
This is not a test.
Oh no! There's someone I want to speak. Oh, Clyde Hall.
Who is Clyde Hall?
Clyde Hall is Bannock Shoshone Native American First Peoples, and he came. Clyde, he's been active in the American Indian movement, I believe, for a long time, as their openly gay, out there person. He has brought the Naraya dance to gay people, which the Naraya is, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. I think it's a descendant of the ghost dance or the sun dance, one of the formal dances that has come back and he's offering to the world. But he started his keynote speech with, "Let me tell you about my grandmother." And that stuck with me ever since. He talked about his upbringing, how it was to be gay and Native American, the challenges with that. If you've read, Tom Spanbauer was our third keynote speaker. The man who fell in love with the moon and In the City of Shy Hunters and Faraway Places, and now his new one is I Loved You More. And Clyde's in all those books. he's a character in all those books. They're close friends that go back many years. Over time, what you see is how the connections just keep looping around. Like Tom's connected to Clyde, and they're both connected to GSV, and then Clyde is connected to the Nariah, which is connected to the fairies, who were connected to the origins of GSV. So there's all these kind of little interweavings that happen. The word tantra means weave or web, and that's what we're doing actually, is a form of tantra, I think, that we're weaving our lives and our stories together, and they cross and they mesh and they move away, and it's a dance.
Okay, how about some of the people that you met who weren't keynote speakers? People who particularly impressed you or inspired you or became friends of yours or scared you or
Well, I mentioned a few already.
You, who are some of those people
Oh my.
that you met because of the conferences? And they may have been in one of your small groups, or you just became intrigued with them more to an extent that was higher than some of the others.
I'm just trying to sort my mind because there's
Take your time.
a bunch of names popping up.
As many as you can willing to talk to us about.
John Stowe became a dear friend.
Okay.
We were Coyote Energy at the conference together. We giggled and we did bad drag, and we harassed workshop leaders and speakers with our humor until some of them I think were ready to shoot us. Raven, I think, was ready to shoot us early on.
Oh.
But we connected early on. John was just a dear, lovely spirit. And
he was there at the first conference you went to, right? Okay.
Yeah. He was, among other things, he was just an utterly beautiful man physically, but he had just such a spirit, elf energy kind of about him, and we just hit it off great. He used to do this terrible drag where he said he was going to be a Neapolitan street hooker, and he'd have this stretchy dress with the armpits torn out, and he glued Brillo pads into his armpits and so on. I've got a picture of that somewhere. I think it wound up in that last Visionary, the two of us in drag. But we were just trouble, and we just loved it. Bernard Morin, he frightened me at the beginning. Bernie is, he's like Andrew, he talks to unseen energies and stuff, and
he lives in Canada?
He's outside of Toronto.
Did he come early on in the conference?
I think he was in about the 4th or 5th year he started coming.
Okay.
And I stayed away from him for several years. So he scared me. I don't know, his energy is so fierce.
Well, how did y'all change that? Just because it's GSV and that's what happened?
Yeah, pretty much. The magic works, but I forget exactly how that shifted. But with Bernard, a lot of things can shift and you don't even know that it's happened, and suddenly something's different. He's just that way. I do know that he has propped up in the most remarkable ways in my life. He used to come to North Carolina and Georgia. He's a Reiki master and a shaman, and he would do work down here, or he would meet with people down here and spend time. And the day that Dexter died, I walked in my house thinking, my world has just ended. And the phone rang, and Bernard said, I'm picking up some energy from you, and I'm about an hour away, and I'm going to come over. Now, this is someone who lives in Canada. As it happened, he was driving back from Georgia or North Carolina or somewhere on his way back, and he just felt the urge to call me and stop over, which normally he didn't stop. And he spent the night with me. He did some grounding work on me. He said, "You've got to get back in your body." And he did some energy work. When I had, in 2005, I was doing some mulching in my front yard and I had a heart attack. And I wound up in Winchester Medical Center with quadruple bypass surgery, heart surgery. And when I'd had the heart attack, I was laying mulch in the front yard, and I felt what was happening, and I knew what was happening, and I drove myself to the hospital, which was about 6 blocks away, and then they carted me off. Well, I had nothing with me. I didn't have my phone. I didn't have my address book. I had no way to contact anybody to let them know what was going on. I knew my mom's number in Texas. She was still alive then, so they would let me do long distance calls like that. So I let my family know, and I let my friend John Restino know. But I hit one bad spot after the surgery where my heart went into fibrillation, and they almost didn't get me back. I mean, essentially I was on the verge of gone. I was sort of out of my body and watching them and that whole thing. And when I came out of that, they hit me with some really heavy drugs, and I had, up to that point, I'd thought, well, okay, either you get well or you die, But when they came out of that, I was so impaired from it that I couldn't lift my head, and I couldn't raise my hand to do the nurse, but I was just immobile. And that's the first time it occurred to me that there might be another outcome that would be worse than dying or living. And I lost it. That was the only time that I really cried. Well, after a little bit, I found that I was able to move, and I looked on my table, the little food table that they have there on the side, and there was a slip of paper. And on the paper it said Bernie, and it had a phone number. And I called him, and he walked me through the whole thing. I said, "Well, I'm seeing people here that dead people. I see dead people," to borrow a phrase. And he said, "Well," "what you're doing is you're trying to decide whether you want to go or stay, and they're showing you that what's there if you want to go." He said, "I hope you'll stick around, but you could choose either way, and it'd be okay." But it was, but then it was like, "Bernard, where did this piece of paper with your phone number come from?" And he said, "I don't know." All I could think is it was in my pants or something for some reason. So he's one, John Stowe.
And that's a painting of his?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you said? Okay.
Yeah.
So he paints as well?
He does, and he stays here every year when he comes down. He comes down a couple times a year and stays with me for a while. And we just carry on. We gossip and dish and go see museums and have fun. I could keep talking about this for a long time, but I think there's just one or two more that I want to mention. Ron Gillette. He was my cabin mate that first year. He was the third person in our cabin, and he was a sweet, sweet man. He was from Florida, from Pensacola, and he had been Miss Florida. He did drag as Angela. Angela was his drag name. And he was the sunniest, sweetest disposition of anyone I think I've ever met at Geosphere or anywhere. He was just a love. And he didn't come the following year, and about 2 years later he came back because he was dying and he wanted to be there one more time, and he was very sick. And it still upsets me. He was not well received.
No?
There were a couple of people there who said, because he was visibly very, very sick.
Mhm.
There were a couple of people there who said, this is bringing up too much memory for me. I can't stand it. And
Oh dear.
He wound up staying in the cabin with me, and he died about a week after that conference. He was really at death's door.
Yeah.
And it had been a tremendous push to get there, I know, for him.
Well, how wonderful that he got there, you know?
Yeah.
Oh.
So, and, okay, two more. Corey Erickson, who was, he was just kind of a haunted man, I think. He came to conferences for a number of years early on. We were cabin mates one year, and we just had a wonderful interaction. And he let me see some aspects of his life. He was struggling to be there. It was a big stretch for him to be present, I think. And he wanted that energy, and I think he was afraid to let himself be fully there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we corresponded for a bit, and I really liked him. And then he just vanished, and I have no idea what became of him, where he went. His life was a little bit unsteady, I think, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was
Where
gone.
was he from?
Michigan.
Okay.
And
Well, I wonder how he found out about the conference. Way up there.
no, he had I think he was friends with Harold Cole,
Mm.
who was up in that area somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
He knew Harold from some place, or William. Oh, I can't think of his name now. He was from Detroit. There were a couple of guys from Michigan, and he knew one of them. I forget which one.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've often wondered about him. He's one of those, like, my therapist used to say, when I quit therapy, he told me, you know, I sit here and I hear your story, and then you go away, and it's like, and then what happened? You wonder.
Right.
So, and that's Corey's. He's one of the unanswered questions. Is what
And his
became
last
of
name
that.
again? Corey
Erickson.
Erickson. Okay.
And the final one was Jeff Jacka, Tiger, who I just had the biggest MASH crush on.
Mm.
Did you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He was really lovely. He was in my small group the last time he was at the conference, I guess. He and I had a connection, and we didn't know what to do with it. And there was a workshop where we were supposed to you'd wind up in a pair with somebody, and one of you was supposed to ask, do you want to have sex with me? And you were supposed to tell the truth, yes or no.
Mhm.
And I wound up with him, and he asked me the question. I said, yes. and I think it scared him. But he maintained a connection even despite that. I mean, it was odd. But he found out that I'd had heart surgery and a heart attack. And he said, oh, you have to come in my room. And I'm thinking, oh, this is it.
Uh-huh.
And he had his computer there, and he said, you need to know this. This is called HeartMath, and it's a program to help you reduce stress, and it's like biofeedback situation basically. And he said, and that'll help your heart. And he was all enthused, and he was teaching me, and I'd done this stuff before, so I kind of went along, and I'm on the monitor, and I go from red to orange, yellow to green, and he said, you know this stuff. I said, I just wanted to get in your room. And we giggled about it, but nothing came of it. It was sort of toward the end of the conference, and he shared that he had kind of enjoyed my energy too.
Mm-hmm.
But then he went off back to Atlanta. He was, I think, caretaking for his mom, who had early onset Alzheimer's or something. I don't remember what the situation was. Something there that had brought him from California back. and he died. He had a heart attack in a hot tub apparently, and last year I was at the fall conference, and Kim Pittman was bringing some stuff into the giveaway table, and he said, "Here, look at this. You might fit this." And it was a Utilikilt. A Utilikilt. They're those very expensive la-di-da kilts that you see guys at GSV sometimes wear. Some of them. And I'd liked them for a long time, but I'm not going to spend $300 for a kilt that I'll wear once or twice a year. He said, "Try this on," and it fit. And he said, "Will you keep it?" And I said, "Well, why are you giving away your Utilikilt?" He said, "Oh, it's not mine. That was Jeff's, Jeff Jacka's." So I was like, "Oh, I'll wear it with pride." In the pocket, I found a tube of chapstick, and I thought, "This has touched Jeff Jacka's lips, and it's going to touch mine."
Wow.
So
another level of magic, GSB magic.
That's it. I mean, there's so many men, and I can't tell you how many have touched my heart in really amazing ways.
Well, if you have a memory that comes up in the next while that you want to share, please do, because it's wonderful that you have a memory. That anybody
at my age, it's getting harder
Not
to do.
that you have one, but that anybody has one. It's because these people were so, they're vividly when you remember them. It's nice. So don't worry about mentioning too many.
Okay.
Did you ever have a fairy name saga? Did you go through that?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, I've had a couple.
Okay.
My first one was the one that most GSVers, old GSVers knew me by, was Andromeda.
Okay.
Because my last name is Strain. Andromeda Strain.
I get it. Okay.
Deadly queen.
Okay.
That was, I tended to do drag as Andromeda. That was more of a drag name than a fairy name per se. My present one was gifted to me by a very short-term boyfriend about 2 years ago, and that's Palindrome.
Okay.
Which is Bob, is a palindrome. So, and that's the one that when I go up to Short Mountain or something, they know me as Palindrome. I've never gone beyond that. I've never gone on a vision quest and heard voices telling me my name or anything. It's just like, well, it's a palindrome, or it's a virus of some kind.
Okay. Okay, so let me see some questions here. Can you talk a little bit about the visionary that you put together recently? How that came to be and what it was like, and
well,
that was an amazing thing.
Thank you.
Such a great.
Thank you.
Wow, that was.
Well, I was rooming with Pat and Lem, Pat Boyle and Lem Arnold, in Emerson. What was it last? It was either last spring or at the visioning gathering that happened last year. Anyway, it was early last year. We were in Anderson, and I was chatting with Pat, and he was saying, well, he'd been tasked. They wanted to have a 25th anniversary visionary. The council did, and he had been unable to get anybody willing to do anything. And I said, well, I used to be a news editor in D.C., and I'd be willing to help with it. And, that would be great. And I didn't think, I was thinking, okay, a little bit of editing and whatnot. The next thing I know, he has stood up in front of the entire assemblage with tears in his eyes and said, a prayer has been answered. Bob Strain is going to produce the 25th anniversary visionary for us. And I was like, ah!
Oh my gosh.
So I rounded up. He had said, well, there are a couple of other people that have expressed interest. So Gary Kaufman and Tony James and Greg Bonin were the team on it. Greg was more a liaison to the council, since he was on the council, and he was our techno guy of how to get this all in PDF and whatnot. Gary did graphic design and layout, and some editing. I had to slap him a time or two. Division of duties didn't get too clear, but he was very collaborative about, we'd go through things, how do we want this, and Tony did most of the proofreading and feedback on it as it evolved. So it was a good team, you know.
Now,
And
where was everybody when you were working on? Was Gary here?
Gary and I worked independently some, and then he'd lug his computer over here with his big screen and his InDesign program, and we'd go through stuff together, or I'd go out to his place.
So he was already up here.
Yeah, he was living here.
Okay.
And Tony, we would just ship stuff online to him to read, and then he'd send back his comments and his corrections. Greg was more the
Where
council
does he
wanted.
live?
Greg lives here in Asheville.
Okay.
He wasn't as involved in the day-to-day work on it. What he did was he kept us apprised of the council, and the council apprised of us. He would arrange for me to go. I went to a council meeting in Atlanta to present my idea for how it should be, the outline and all. And and then there was a noon meeting at the fall conference council meeting that I did a little presentation to show what we had to that point. So he sort of did that, and I don't know, I think he probably ran some interference for me with some of the council that wanted to help. And he took it when we finished the files. He was the one that translated it all so that it was accessible on the website and as a PDF and so on.
That was a very powerful thing, I thought.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, when it landed on my lap, at first I just thought, well, crap. And then it was like, well, okay, if it's an anniversary issue, I think we need to have a retrospective part of it, and then a present, and then let's figure out if we can look forward a little bit. And once I had that kind of three-part idea in place, it sort of put itself into what would go and what wouldn't, and then it was just basically the legwork of slogging through old visionaries and old photos and trying to remember who keynoted what year, and did I remember a thing they'd said?
Right.
And
so what materials did y'all have to look back through? I mean, did you have a run of the visionary, I guess?
Well, yeah, all the visionaries that have ever been published are now on the website.
Okay.
They're PDF formats, so you can pull them down, you can download them and print out what you need. I had, that trove of that box in there you've got. There were lots of conference announcements, workshop. There's a lot of material that you could cull through there. It was kind of research, really. And we enlisted Ron Lamb and Peter Kendrick to tell us some of the story of running water and the very early stuff, and they have treasure troves of Ron. Oh my God, you need to nab him for his collection of photos from all these things, and he's got them all in albums and names and dates and places, and it's just yeah, he's really got a collection there. So there was that, and some of it it was seat of the pants memory. I say, Gary, that year that so-and-so was keynote, do you remember anything about that conference that I can make a little blurb on? And we always could come up with something. Some of it is a little bit like, oh, well, that was one of those years.
Yeah.
But
okay.
But it was it was wonderful for me too, because it made me reflect at how significant this has been in my life. This has been more than a third of my life has been engaged in GSV now, and and it's as I said earlier, it's taken me on the music journey and all kinds of things I really didn't expect.
Now, were you otherwise involved in the planning process or all that bureaucracy that got invented eventually? Were you one of those people ever?
No.
As elder people or whatever?
No, I am the sacred elder of music, and I'm happy to be there. They gave me a blanket, a Pendleton blanket, and they paraded me around the room, and that's plenty for me.
Lucky. I mean, okay. Yeah,
Well, you know, I mean, for years I was away. I was nowhere near. Now, when they did, I will take that back in that when they started the sort of disseminated planning,
yeah.
I was on a couple of work groups on conference calls and all for the Safe and Sacred Touch Erotic Energy
Yeah.
working group that Hunter facilitates.
Uh-huh.
And I was on the entertainment one for a little while, very little while. I was sort of trying to step away from the talent show, and that was just another way to drag me back in. So I didn't stay with that one too awfully long.
All right. Can you talk about how you see the organization or the conferences or your experiences of them? It has evolved or changed or morphed or whatever. Whatever your thoughts are on that.
I can. I think our early roots were we were rooted in the Radical Fairy tradition, which is minimal structure. In some cases, with the fairies, no structure. But GSB always had they could set a container for whatever magic was going to happen, and a lot of times they didn't. At least as far as I could see, they didn't go much beyond that. They created the conditions for things to happen, and things would happen. I think over time, as we've gone forward through time, a lot of those guys are gone. They tended to be fairly young men. A lot of them really weren't in the working world much. They were sort of part-timers or they're hippies, basically, gay hippies. And so they had a different approach than what GSV has evolved to, which is much more structured than it was. And it's more, it seems, now this is subjective.
Right.
To me, it seems that we've moved into more of a psychotherapeutic process model where the goal seems to be, how do I put this? It seems like we're looking for some sort of a catharsis while we're there, some sort of epiphany, but that it doesn't translate well away from the mountain for a lot of people. It's sort of like a weekend experience. Whereas I know in my life, and I saw in some others, that GSV was more about transformation over time. It was not just let's go to the mountain and really just feel our feelings and have all this stuff, and then nothing really is different in our lives. I mean, people left jobs, people changed careers, people moved across the country as a result of things that happened at GSV. So I think we've moved in the direction, and I don't know that it's a bad one, I'm not saying that, but I think that what we've done is moved into the direction of more of, I'd say more of a conference and less of a gathering, if that makes that distinction works for you. The danger in that I see is that when things become too structured, there's no real room for creativity or spontaneity or magic to happen. It becomes a process instead of a happening or an event. And so I don't know that that's a bad thing. I think the demographic of GSV has changed a lot over the years that I've been going. Like I said, there are more men of a certain age now. There are many men that seem to come there out of marriages, being in the closet, maybe raising a family, and they're coming out late in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad GSV is there for these guys. There's not much in the wider gay society for them at this point. The bars aren't going to be very welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
And, so maybe GSV is transforming itself into some different direction. I don't know. I miss the old days, but that's because that's my history.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear people that come to their first conference in the last year or two that they're in ecstasies about what they've experienced and how they felt at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we can keep that's the best thing. I felt when I got to GSV that I had found my spiritual home.
Mm-hmm.
And, people are telling me the same thing now. They're saying, I feel at home there. I feel welcomed. I feel understood.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as long as GSV keeps that, the form may change, the procedures and the ritual may change, but the essence of it, it will go forward.
Mm-hmm.
And, people fret about, oh, well, GSV, it's self-limiting, it's going to die out. The energy will go forward. The energy was around before GSV. It was at Running Water, and before that it was at the Southeastern Gay and Lesbian Conference. Before that it was the Mattachine, and it goes back through the ages.
Mm-hmm.
This energy doesn't go away,
Mm-hmm.
but it does transform. And I can see a day, and maybe in my lifetime, maybe not, that GSV won't exist in its present form.
Mm-hmm.
That it will have moved into maybe some sort of online presence completely, or fragmented into local groups. I don't know what the future is for GSV, but I don't think you can destroy that energy. And so,
what is it like for you to decide to go to a conference or not to go? You said you've been to all of them, but the first one?
I didn't know about the first one, or I'd have probably gone to it too. Or maybe not. James Broughton was my draw to conference, but
and has the reason that you go been transformed into more of a reunion-y kind of experience than something else?
Yeah, it is. From the first year, I knew that I wanted to be there every year.
Okay.
So I've never really questioned that. In the last few years, I've gotten to do I want to do this again? But ultimately, it's always,
Mm-hmm.
I do.
Mm-hmm.
And it has changed its purpose for me. As I said, being on the mountain in that physical sacred space, being with people that I love, is why I go. And early on, it was like, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to learn this, and I'm going to do that workshop, and I'm going to find out about, sacred geometry or whatever the thing is this year, and I'm going to just, it was a learning process. Now, there are elements of that still there, but it's about seeing people and being on the mountain, and it's also about holding space for the men who have come later. I do a lot of small group facilitating. I have over the years, and that's been important to me because I always wind up with a batch of newbies that are sort of intimidated and don't know what's going on and why are people hissing at the speaker and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good for me because that reminds me of how difficult it was for me to come up that mountain for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
What courage was involved in that,
Mm-hmm.
taking that leap. And I see that again.
Do you? So, what are the elements that have survived the transformation? What is still the same from the beginning for you? What feelings or?
You mean for the organization, or for me personally?
Both.
Okay. Well, I think for the organization, much of the form has remained somewhat the same. It's gotten a bit more codified with time. I think the emphasis has shifted a little bit, as I was saying, from spontaneity to process.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, what has changed? I don't go to as many workshops. I take naps.
Okay.
I still get sleep deprivation up
Yeah.
there. I don't sleep well away from home. So,
Uh-huh.
and I've gotten to where, in the early days, I was it was like the kid that never went to summer camp. I had to do everything. I was devastated when it was over. If I missed a workshop, it was the end of the world. It was like, I want all this. I just absorb it.
Uh-huh.
And it's perfectly fine if I feel like I want to go take a nap or I want to go walk in the woods and be by myself for a little while. This is getting a little overwhelming. I'm a little tired. I just want to be still.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't do that in the first years. The other thing is that subtext is like, I was one of those pitiful souls that on Saturday night after the drumming, I'd be wandering around in the mist wondering, where is everybody? Everybody's getting laid but me. And feeling all pitiful and now it's just like, it's bedtime, thank God.
Yeah.
That's part of my age is showing, but part of it too is that, it took me a long time to let go of the notion that was the reason I went up there.
Uh-huh.
I mean, that was always sort of the unspoken subtext. It's like, well, I'm going to go get spiritual and I'm going to get some.
Right.
And, bitter disappointment on bitter disappointment. Finally, it was like, that's not why you're going there, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
If it happens, and it's happened a few times that I've connected with someone
Mm-hmm.
in a lovely way, but you can't count on that.
Mhm.
And so I just, I just go for, it's an energy hit,
Mhm.
it's from the connections with the men and the connections with the land.
Mhm.
It's
Okay.
just there.
Let's see.
I thought you were doing the technical equipment.
He's helping me
What's his
remember.
mission?
Are there people that you think we should be sure before we run out of steam,
Uh-huh.
who we should definitely should talk to because of your impression of their importance to the organization over time or their contribution or whatever? Or do you want to make sure that we've got them on our list?
Well,
Pen?
I can. You may have hit some of these. I think you've already interviewed Gary and John Brock.
Mm-hmm.
Chase Robinson. Have you got him or you've
We've
had
done them.
Oh, you've done it?
Yeah.
Okay. Lucky you. The three that come to mind offhand would be Andrew Raymer,
Okay.
who's keynoted. He was at every conference, but for the first 20. He was at
Yeah.
all 20 of the first, and he keynoted all of those.
Okay.
Peter Kendrick and Ron Lamb. They were the founders, basically, those two, and Raven put it together and got it rolling, and continued to
Okay.
look in. I assume you've gotten Franklin Abbott, yeah.
Okay. Any
That's-
newish comers that we want to also talk to some people who have not been there from the beginning, who we want to capture their experience of it. So if there are any people that you know of in particular who popped up more recently than others,
Okay.
that would be good because we may not know of them.
I mentioned my friend John Restaino.
Okay.
He
How do you
lives
spell his name?
Restaino.
Restaino.
He lives outside of Harper's Ferry. He was a close friend up there that I finally lured down here.
Okay.
And he's been to, I think, 3 or 4 conferences now. So he's not new, but he's fairly recent.
Talk to me about how you lured him down. What did you do? Just start?
Well, I mean,
Did you know him before you came to the first conference?
No. I met him after I moved to West Virginia, And we became close friends there. And he knew that I'd come down here every year, and I'd come back and I'd babble about how wonderful it was and so on. And he'd like, I can't, no, that would intimidate me, that would frighten me. And finally, I guess it was the year before I moved here. Maybe it was the year I did move here. This may be his. I think he's been to 3. I've lost track now. It's
He
recent.
didn't come down with you though. He came alone.
Mm-hmm. He. Well, let's see. It's a little tangled. How did he get here?
You were his only contact with GSV. Probably,
I was.
right?
I was.
Mhm.
And let's see. He began to get to know people in West Virginia because Bernard would come to West Virginia. Jim Faison came up a couple of times.
Okay.
And one New Year's Eve, we had a mini GSV gathering at the house. We had we had 14, this was a year or two after Dexter had died. We had 14 people for dinner.
How did you know 14 people in that?
Well, Bernard was there from Canada.
Uh-huh.
Jim Faison and Chris Huberto were there from down here, from Atlanta.
They were visiting you?
They were all visiting me and staying at the house.
Okay. Okay.
John Restaino lived there, and his partner
Mhm.
came. Who else? There was a bunch of us. I'm forgetting now. Oh, Dan Dewberry came from Baltimore. That's someone you should talk to.
Dan Dewberry?
Yeah, Sacred Elder of Drag.
I don't know him, so that's...
You don't know Dan?
No.
He's
I
an
don't know
old
his
GSV.
recent stuff.
Well, his looks change from moment to moment.
I might not recognize him even if I knew him. Okay. He's in
and
Baltimore?
He's in Baltimore, and I put Bernard Morin on the list too,
Okay.
as a possible. Anyway, I forget who else was there, but there was a batch.
So y'all had your own little conference?
We had a circle in the living room,
Oh.
and half the non-GSV folks just kind of giggled behind their hands at us, but they sat there and we had a great dinner. But John was after that was saying, "I got it. There was enough GSV spark there." He said, "This is what you've been talking about," and it was a couple of years after that he came for the first time. I don't remember if we drove down together or not. I really can't remember.
Okay. Have there been anybody else that you've gotten into the organization? Or that ultimately came? Maybe?
Well, the only person that's come with me was the year after Ricky died. He wanted his ashes brought to Cherokee land. He was part Cherokee. And Steve Lee came down with me. Steve was a friend from D.C., and he went by the name of Stranger at the conference. And he was a big hit, but he came with me, and we went into the Smokies and scattered the ashes before the conference.
Mm-hmm.
He's not been back. He lives in Seattle now. He's assistant to the new mayor. It was weird. He was at the conference, and he got a call just as we were getting ready to leave that he had been. This was in the Clinton administration years. He had been named to the White House AIDS Policy Office.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to be an official there. So his life took a very, very busy turn after that conference.
Mm-hmm.
The only other one that's sort of a remote is a close friend of John's in West Virginia named Kim Potter. Who has been to a couple of conferences now, and he is another one that's just like, where has this been?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they'll probably both be down for the fall.
Uh-huh.
I'm pretty sure Kim will be. He came in for spring as well.
Okay. Wow.
So that would be the other possible newbie that I could think of.
Uh-huh.
But beyond that,
Do you think you would be living in Asheville if GSV hadn't blown through your life?
oh, not a chance. I'd have never known about this. It would be like sitting here and talking about Vail or Boulder,
Mhm.
Colorado. Sounds nice. I'll never go. But coming down, I got to know this area, and I thought, this is really nice.
Mhm.
When I retired, I was, theoretically, I was going to sell my house and move away. And I was planning on Atlanta because I had so many GSV friends there.
Mhm.
And Bernard kept saying, what about Asheville? And I kept saying, well, it's nice, and I know people there, it's pretty, but I like Atlanta. And I was in Atlanta a couple of times to visit Jim Faison,
Mhm.
and I became kind of horrified at how overgrown it's gotten and how difficult it is to maneuver
Mhm.
traffic-wise, and it looks like they just took Manhattan and spread it out for miles and miles. So I think this was a good fit for me.
Mhm. Where is Jim Faison now?
He's in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
He went to work out there for a startup company
Mhm.
as their counsel. And
Is he somebody we should talk to about GSB, or is he not really?
I don't think he's in it. I think he's kind of moved away from it in the
Uh-huh.
last few years. I haven't seen Jim in 4 or 5 years. We've talked once or twice on the phone,
Mhm.
but I think he's kind of moved on with his life from those days.
Okay. Well, what have we not covered that you wanted to get recorded? Because we want to be sure that we don't drive off and you go, oh shoot, I wanted to mention this or that person.
I'm sure that's going to happen, but
Well.
right now, I remember, I was involved in the talent show from the get-go, and it became sort of an albatross around my neck after a while, but there was always magic there, and a couple of things from that will always stand out in my memory that really, they just encapsulate the magic that we have.
Uh-huh.
My second year there, I guess it was, Raphael was doing the talent show, and there was a young man, I can't think of his name, Andrew Raymer and I were talking about him, and Andrew remembered his name, but I didn't. He was a doctor from Atlanta,
Mhm.
and he signed up for the talent show, and he got up and he said, I was here last year, he said, and I was so blown away by the talent show and the everything that everybody did, and I thought, I want to do something next year. And I've always wanted to play the piano, so I went home and I bought a piano, and I've taken a year's worth of lessons, and I want to play Here, There, and Everywhere by the Beatles for you. And he sat down and he started playing, and it was like you would expect for somebody that's had about a year of piano. It was a little halting,
Yeah.
and about halfway through, he forgot, and he stopped. He sat there for a minute and stared at the keyboard, and you could hear nobody breathing in the room. And he started over again from the top. And the same thing happened again. He stopped, and he paused a little bit longer, and then he started once again, and he got all the way through the piece this time and stood up and burst into tears. And the whole room was just like, lost it.
Wow.
That idea of just putting it out there and that kind of courage. I wouldn't have had that courage to do something that I was that unfamiliar with in front of a room.
Mhm.
Two other things. You may be here all afternoon if I
I
get
want
going.
to be. This
Uh,
is making me so
The
wonderful.
other thing in the talent show was Miguel Molina
Mhm.
came out one time, and he set up this little lamp thing on the floor, and he had a boom box, and this was in the treehouse by then. This was later on, and he's up on the stage, and he's shirtless, which Miguel is Miguel, you know.
Yes, nice.
And he did flagging. He had a white flag, and it was a black light. So you couldn't really see him after he started. You just saw this. It looked like butterfly moving. I'd never seen really flagging before.
Mm-hmm.
And the music he used was Purcell's Dido's Lament from Dido and Aeneas.
Mm-hmm.
It's Remember Me, Remember Me.
Wow.
I can still see it. And the final thing, and I think this is pretty much everything I need to say about GSV, was the last year I think that David Salyer was presiding elder. He called me up before the conference at some point and he said, you know, you're always playing the piano for all these people in the show, and he says, I'd like you to have a little space of your own.
Mm-hmm.
He said, so we have a workshop slot reserved for you on Saturday morning. We'd like you to do a music salon. And I said, well, what do you have in mind? And he said, well, I know that you write music, and maybe you could do some of your music, and maybe things that you want. If you want to involve other people, do what you want. And he said, and I think it'd be nice if people sang some, you know, get the men singing. And I thought, oh God, sing along. It's come to this. But you'll find in the box out there, there's a stack of mimeograph or photocopied things called the Friday morning music club.
Mm-hmm.
It was Friday morning, and it's lyrics to, oh, I'm getting to know you.
Mm-hmm.
Someday my prince will come.
Yeah.
I'm going to sit down and write things that people would know.
Yeah.
And so I handed out these things. Well, and I was thinking, this is going to be so cheesy. People are going to hate this. Oh my God, I'm going to be so mortified. And so I did my little thing. I had Teddy playing harp for stuff, and Tim Cape played a little fiddle, and I had a couple of numbers that I'd written dance pieces like tangos, and at one point Cammie comes in and drag and does a tango, and at one point Dan Dewberry swirls through the room to I Feel Pretty, but the thing about that was I was sitting at that piano and I was looking at the men, and when they started to sing, it was like looking into light. Just looking out there, they were just so... All right.
Your turn.
Yeah. They were so beautiful. So beautiful. And I was thinking, this is what I've dreamed of all my life and never knew how to get. And here it is. It's been handed to me. To just have that kind of connection, you know. Mm-hmm. Churches have known it for centuries. You want to raise energy, you make people sing as a group. But it just, you know, I'm so used to city queens, you know, that the idea, oh, sing along to God. And they were with me just right the whole way.
Wow.
It was, I think, the most moving thing that's ever happened to me at GSV, and that's saying something.
Yeah, there's a lot to compare it to.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great story. Oh.
So, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.